When we're talking about powerlifting and just strength training in general, one of the things that we use what's called joint by joint theory. This was actually popularized by a physical therapist, Ray Cook, and a strength coach, Mike Boyle. But it's just a really good way to look at the joints in the body. And this is going to really help when you're picking out different warm-up exercises, when we're looking at mechanics and exercise technique. The theory is that certain joints require more stability. And when we say stability, we're talking about the ability to control and resist movement. And some joints require more mobility, so the ability to control a range of motion and actively go through a range of motion. So just switch over here. So we look at Don and we go from the ground up. When it comes to strength training and powerlifting, we want to make sure the feet are very stable, so we don't want the feet moving around too much when we lift. In order to hit proper squat depth, and depending on how you bench press, and if you're a conventional deadlifter, we're going to need some what we call dorsiflexion. So we need some range of motion at the ankle. If your ankles are locked up, that's going to hinder your squat, your bench press, or your conventional deadlift. This is why you see some lifters wear a heeled shoe. So sometimes what the heel does, it gives you it starts your body in a position of what we call plantar flexion. So that's when you're kind of, if you guys can this is an exact, you wouldn't ever have a heel height this big, but you can see if I'm here, the more I elevate my heels, the more my feet are pointed down. Okay, so that's going to allow my knees to travel forward more and more, and I could potentially squat deeper, especially if you're like a close down squatter or something like that. So that's why you'd want to wear a heel if you ever were wondering why some people wear like a weightlifting shoe. Knees. Do we want our knees moving around a lot, like coming inward and things like that when we squat? So we want more stability at the knee. It's not to say we obviously want our knee to be able to move, but we definitely don't want our knees coming in. We don't want we don't want any like rotational lateral movement of the knee. So we want more stability at the knee. And as far as getting stability at the knee, that's going to actually require a lot of glute activation and hip strength. The hips, we want them to be strong, but we also want them to be very mobile. So in order to hit depth in the squat, in order to get position in a sumo deadlift, in order to get in a bench arch, we want to have a lot of hip extension, external rotation, and abduction. So we want to have a lot of range of motion and mobility at the hip. The spine, the pelvis, we don't want it to really move too much. We want a lot of stability. So we really don't want to be using our lower back as a mover. We want to be using it as a stabilizer muscle. So we don't want to be arching to move our squat. We want to move at our hip. So we want a lot of stability in our trunk, and through a lot of planking exercises and ab work and just breathing and bracing and stability, that's going to allow us for lower back health and stability and trunk stability. Now in the upper back, we want to be able to move the upper back quite a little bit. So keeping our chest up in a squat, keeping the chest up in a bench. So we want some thoracic extension here. A lot of us are hunched over, so we're able to hold our upper back position. We do want some mobility here. In terms of powerlifting, this is different for when we're doing push-ups and things like that, but in general, we want some stability in our scaps, in our scapular muscles. We don't want our shoulders to protract when we finish a bench, or protract when we're deadlifting or squatting and things like that. So we need a lot of strength and stability in our upper back. If we're benching and you see like someone over press out, or if their scapula is moving in the bottom, that's going to potentially give us shoulder problems. So you need a lot of stability here. And we're going to need some mobility and range of motion in our shoulders. So we can get a good placement of the bar in our back, so we can get a good range of motion on the bench, and get a good range of motion in the deadlift and things like that. So we want to make sure that the chest and the pecs and the shoulders don't get too immobile. We need some mobility there. So when we're picking out exercise and when we're executing movements, we want to make sure that we don't kind of disobey that joint by joint theory. We want to make sure. So if we start to round at our back, if we start to internally rotate our shoulders when we bench and things like that, that's going to be problematic. That's going to cause potential injury down the road. So like in the morning, one of the things we worked on breathing and bracing. So when we take that diaphragmatic breath and when we brace, what does that aid and where does that give us stability?
The back of the spine.
So the lower back and the trunk. So one thing that we always want to make sure is that we have neutral spine. Neutral is a range. So in general, your lower back has what's a slight curve to it, so we call that a lordosis. The upper back has a slight kyphosis, or a slight rounding, and the cervical spine has a slight lordosis, or a slight extension. So if your upper back starts a little bit round in a deadlift, for example, it's not the end of the world, but we want to try to keep it as neutral as possible. As far as analyzing your movement, a fixed neutral position is going to be the strongest and safest. So if I'm going through my squat and my deadlift, if I want to have 3 points of contact while I'm lifting. Some things to look out for. If I'm overextended, that's not good either. So some women, you'll see their rib cage will be pointing upward and their pelvis will be pointing down. Get a feel for where your ribs are. Get a feel for where your ribs are. Get a feel for where your pelvis is. I want you to arch your back and notice how that distance increases. Round the back, notice how the distance shortens. Neutral, the hands are stacked. So I have one thumb on my pelvis and one hand on my rib cage. Arch the back, position extends, round the back, shortens. We call that open scissor position, which is no good. Closed scissor position is no good. We want it stacked. So we always want the rib cage stacked over the pelvis. So when we're analyzing lower back mechanics, we want to look at the relationship between our rib cage and our pelvis. When we're squatting, when we're deadlifting, we want to look out for any type of flexion moment. So what does that mean? So if I'm deadlifting, let's say I start a little round. Now remember what I said before, it's okay if I had to pick one or the other, neutral spine is the best. A slight rounding in the upper back would be like second best, not necessarily optimal, but it's okay. What I don't want to see is starting out perfect, and then there's a flexion moment when I lift off the floor. So whatever position you start in, you should finish in. So this happens sometimes your butt will shoot up or over. So if I'm squatting down, if I have this happened to Laz and Ismi, if I have a flexion moment, sometimes the bar will come down, and sometimes even the spotters will grab it even if the bar is coming up. So you want to be able to maintain that position. If there's any type of flexion moment, that's going to be problematic for potentially, getting a red light in the lift, or potentially injury and things like that. So the same thing on deadlift. Whatever position we start in, we want to kind of finish in. Okay? So when we're analyzing technique, that's going to be important. When it comes to things like bench press, whatever position we start in, we want to finish in. So if I'm starting locked down here, it'd take a lot of times when people will mess this up on the setup. They'll get in a really great position, they lose their shoulder position. So I want to take it out, I want to bring it down. As I press, I don't want to lose my shoulder position or my back position. So if I start off extended and pinned down and back, I want to keep that position down and back.